sometimes your essays will require large revisions, such as a change in organization, a refocus of the information you're trying to use, things like that. But sometimes you can have a really small fix that has a really big impact on how your writing is received to your reader. Because again, we really want to work on engaging your reader and help them stay focused on what you're trying to say and interested in what you're trying to say. And one way to do that is to use strong active verbs. So, of course, a verb is the action word in any sentence that you have, and in order to have a complete sentence, you have to have a verb. So, obviously, you're going to have a lot of verbs in any essay that you write, because no sentence would be complete without them. So, when would you use strong active verbs? And of course, I'm going to get to examples as to what exactly they are. But really, you always need to use good, strong verbs. And it doesn't really matter what type of writing you're doing. Sometimes you might be writing a narrative essay, or you will be writing some sort of creative piece, whether in your own time or for a course. It really doesn't matter. But sometimes you're also going to be writing academic essays, which probably will be what you're doing the most. But again, it doesn't matter what type of essay you're writing. You have to have strong verbs that clearly show your reader what you're trying to say and what action is taking place. And by focusing on the action of each sentence, you are really going to engage your reader. Instead of saying something bland like, he looked across the plain, you can say he gazed, he stared, because any word has, any single word has great power and emphasis when you change it or alter it in some way. So again, you can always use these strong verbs. So don't think that, oh, well, I'm writing an expository essay, I don't need to use strong words. Yeah, you do, because it's what helps get your reader engaged. So let's talk about active voice versus passive voice. You've probably heard in the past that passive voice is bad and, oh, don't do that. I'm not one that really harps on it a lot in terms of pointing it out in your papers. I might point out if it's definitely a recurring trend. But for the most part, it's not a huge deal, but I still want to bring it to mind to you so that you are more aware. And mostly I'm hoping that you will focus more on the active side as opposed to the passive, because sometimes passive voice is absolutely appropriate. And that's fine. It's not that passive is bad. It's really not. You just need to use it with purpose and for a specific reason. So when you use active verbs, you are emphasizing the doer of the action. And I mean, it's your more traditional sentence. They create more vivid images in your reader's mind, and it just helps to show who's doing what, and that's the end of it. So look at this example. The student wrote the essay. Wrote is the verb. Student is the subject, so the student wrote the essay. Whereas with passive voice, you are emphasizing the action as opposed to the doer of it. So the essay was written by the student. So the subject of the sentence goes from the student to the essay, and then was written by the student. And the easy way to look for passive voice in your paper is words like was and had been. So that's really the easy way to do it. Wrote is the active, was written, had been written is the passive. So again, I'm sure you can see that, oh, okay, this person did this. Okay, this was done by this person. It inverts the order of the sentence and it puts emphasis elsewhere. So again, passive voice is not necessarily bad. It just changes the emphasis of your sentence. And most of the time, you want the doer of the action to be the emphasis, especially when you're working with sources and in integrating them into your own writing in most of your academic essays. So you want to focus on the doer. So so-and-so said this, not this was said by so-and-so, unless you're doing, again, for a specific purpose. Now, there are some times when you can use passive verbs appropriately. If you don't know or don't want to reveal the doer of the action, then you don't have to. So the event had been postponed. So here we don't know who postponed it, and perhaps the author did that on purpose, or perhaps the author doesn't know. But this would be an appropriate use of the passive voice. Sometimes the receiver of the action is more important than the doer. So the president was welcomed by the crowd. The crowd The active version of this would be the crowd welcomed the president. So what's more important? Is your focus the president or is your focus the crowd? Because if it's the crowd, you want an active verb. If it's the president, this would be more appropriate, which creates passive voice. Sometimes you'll also need to preserve the flow of your sentence. So in that case, you would just do whatever helps best keep the parallelism in your sentence, which means that the statements that you use are similar to one another. So there really are times when passive voice is appropriate, but for the most part, in any type of writing, you want to really focus on your active verbs and keeping your verbs active. All right, so how can you strengthen your verbs if you find that you need help in this area? First, I would suggest for everybody to take stock of the types of verbs that you use in any given paragraph. Just start one paragraph at a time and underline your words or your verbs. Highlight them in some way and look and say, are these bland? Are these boring? They're not really based on context. You can just look exactly at the verbs and think, how can I make this more engaging? How can I make it more creative? How can I be more clear and specific? So look for patterns in a given paragraph that you can improve and then simply fix them. It's a simple replacement. Instead of wrote, you could say crafted. The student crafted the essay. All you're doing is changing one word. So this is a really quick fix. It may take a little bit of time to proofread and highlight all of your verbs, but you'll quickly see that, oh, well, that's a boring verb. Oh, that's boring. Oh, I can totally improve there. And then you can go back and do that paragraph by paragraph, and bam, you instantly have a more engaging paper with very, very little work. Also, you want to make sure that you use very vivid and specific verbs because, as I said before, one word can hold a lot of power when you're trying to say something. So instead of saying he looked up, he glanced up. Was it a quick look? He gazed up. What kind of look was it? Because looked is very generic and bland. It doesn't give a whole lot of description. Changing it to a different word can be much more specific, and it can have some connotation that comes along with it. It can provide some meaning and some emphasis simply by changing one word. Also, and this would perhaps be in a more creative type essay. Down here, with she wrote, this is something you're probably going to say quite a bit in your essays when you're dealing with sources. So instead of saying she wrote, she articulated, or she argued. Things like that. Again, one word changed, very, very different message is delivered. And again, I've said it before, but you want to make sure that you engage your reader through the action of your essay, because without action, your paper doesn't go anywhere. So the action is what literally drives your paper from the beginning to the end. You have to have action words in your sentences, so use them well, use them wisely, and make them count. Just have as much power as you can in the smallest space that you can. So hopefully just doing this one little change in your paper will really add some emphasis and some engagement with your reader. So, there was one other thing I wanted to look at before I closed up. I'm going to post this online as well. This is from Penn State University. It's using active verbs. I'm not going to go over this, but please read it in your own time, and it will help you figure out how to use active verbs. And I believe it focuses more on academic writing, which is really what you're going to do most of the time in college. So here are a bunch of different words that you can use instead of, say, wrote. Going back to my example, she wrote, she hypothesized, she estimated, she implied. There are so many different words you can use other than she wrote. So here are some more. And here, this person is categorizing them. So here's another category of verbs that you can use. So this is just a really quick example. You can find more lists of good active verbs online if you want to do some research. Because I know it's helpful to have something in front of you to go, okay, I've got this bland verb. I don't know what to replace it with. You go to a list like this, make sure that they make sense. Don't just plug them in without thinking about them, but think, oh, yes, she really did introduce this information. Okay, I can say she introduced instead of she said. Perfect. And there you go. It really is that easy. You just have to be aware, be cognizant of what you are trying to say, and pick verbs that are very appropriate to the message you're trying to deliver. So best of luck. Let me know how I can help.